Hello, everyone. Welcome to ETimes. I'm Rachit Gupta. Joining me for a conversation today is Pavani Rao Boddapati. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. I was very stressed about that. So, guys, Pavani has worked on the film of the moment, the film of the year, Avatar Way of the Water. So let's jump into that conversation. Avni, why don't you tell our audiences what exactly, in what role have you worked on the VFX of Avatar?
So I'm a visual effects supervisor at VFX in Wellington, New Zealand, and my role entails delivering a set of sequences for the films I worked on. So when the Sully family take off from high camp and they start flying to the Metkayina village, you see the atoll and you see these big crashing waves. Everything that's inside the seawall was under my domain, and I'm responsible for delivering the final images. So that includes all aspects of simulations, working with the animation supervisor with Dan Barrett, getting the effects, the final look, the lighting, compositing. So that all comes under my domain.
Pavni, I have to ask you this. Of all the reactions that Avatar has got, it's been the visuals, obviously, that have impressed people the most. So when you get such feedback, not just for you personally, your entire team, how does that feel? Is this what you guys work for as well?
Yeah, it feels really great. Our crew and our team has been working on this project for 5 years, some of them for 10 years, actually. Some of the technology teams never stopped working on it since 2009. And everyone, all the teams are, because it's December and it's our holiday break, people are in their countries with their family watching this movie. It's a family movie. It's the sort of thing you're going to watch with your friends, your parents, your grandparents. And we have a chat group with my team, and to see people posting photos from all over, like someone posted a photo from Delhi yesterday, someone posted a photo from Vancouver with their parents and watching the movie. It was amazing, because it's not always the case that artists who work on a project are thrilled or happy 100% with what they produce. I think the beauty of this is it's actually a great film. Forget about the visual effects. It's a great movie. You can enjoy. It is a movie that's a repeat watcher. Like my mom watched the first movie, and she has actually watched very few of the projects I worked on, but she's watched Avatar multiple times, because she said, yeah, it feels like a movie that I've watched. It feels like an Indian movie. There's family and there's values, and that's what I take away, is when the crew is really happy and they're able to enjoy this movie with their family and their children and their friends. That's the best compliment.
I am sort of a tech geek when it comes to CGI kind of films. So I've always been told that when it comes to VFX, water is the trickiest to render. So, and you have worked on those sequences. So why don't you tell us about it? And this whole film is about water.
Yes. So it's roughly 3,200 shots in the movie, out of which 2,200 shots are of water. Yeah. If you tell any visual effects person this 5 years before the movie comes out, you'd probably pass out, because of it's very difficult. We've done water movies before. Now, just to put this in perspective in terms of how the technology helps this is, in 2017, Mr. Joe Lettieri, who's our senior VFX supervisor, he asked me to work on Battle Angel Alita. And it was just 10 shots, less than 10 shots, where Alita puts on her suit and she goes under the water. And it's a very short sequence. And it was supposed to be, because it's the same team, it's Lightstorm and John Landau, it was supposed to be a test bed to see what do we need to do to take the technology to be able to produce. It took me 1 year to do those 10 shots. That's wow. The complexity, because it's not just the look of the water to get it out of looking fake. It's also getting simulations coupled with the water of hair and costume, the lighting and the rendering itself is very difficult. Is in 1 year, what we did is we took 5 basic things. We said we're going to do the hair sims, we're going to do costume sims, we're going to get the caustics working in the renderer, which is those little patterns of light you get when it gets when it changes between the air and the water. We said we're going to do some of the compositing techniques and the look of the water to just look realistic. It took us 1 year to do those 10 shots. So if you put that in mind, we finished those 10 shots, and then we got our whole team together and we did all of the R&D and the technology to be able to do 2,200 shots for this film. So it's the biggest visual effects film that VFX has done so far. And VFX has been around forever. So that's a pretty big deal.
So I also have to ask you this, how has the technology changed from 2009 to today? I mean, Avatar 1 came out, nobody had ever seen anything like it.
Yes.
And to sort of, work on that sort of the benchmark, I'm pretty sure it must have been crazy, but how much has technology enabled you to do that now?
Absolutely. Technology is the reason. I mean, starting with the facial performance, right? Like the performance that you could grab in 2009 versus what Jim and Lightstorm have done on this film, where you've got all of the intricacies of the facial performance and the scenes with crowds where there's 100 people and you've managed to capture that couldn't have been done back in 2009. That's all technology that needed the time to develop. And there's always been a team of researchers and R&D at Weta who never stopped working on the technology. So we've had people sitting in Los Angeles at the Lightstorm offices. We've had Lightstorm people coming over to Weta. So that process has continued. How are we going to shoot this film? How are we going to capture this technology? How are we going to render this? Because that's a very complex thing, is to the human mind is so sensitive to figuring out when water is not real. Water and fire, they say those are the two really hard things. You can tell immediately when something is off. You might not be, if you're, like my mom, she might not know the technical details, but she'll say it and she'll say, something's off.
Yeah.
You can tell, there's a human, and that's those two things. And in this movie, you've got water, you've got fire, and you've got fire on water. So that's the trinity. It's all the technology. We could not have attempted this film 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We needed the time to develop the technology for the facial, for how Jim shoots the cameras, for us to be able to render it and composite it. But we needed the time to do it.
You've brought James Cameron into the conversation. I have to ask you, what sort of a filmmaker is he? Because in India there are like dedicated fan clubs for James Cameron. People, you mention James Cameron, people say we're going to watch anything that he puts out. So there's a real curiosity around him, and Indians, of course, have not had as much access to him because he's not been here. So what sort of light can you shed on him as a person, as an artist, as a filmmaker?
For me, he is my favorite director. I've spent so much time working on his projects. What I like about him is the story and the visuals, and being from a visual effects background himself, he's able to create this world where we think it's real. Like, I finished the movie and I turned to the guy, I watched it last week, and I turned to the artist who was sitting next to me, and we were talking about Jake and Neferi as if they're real people. Oh my God. So, when she was that's the power of his filmmaking and his vision, is you finish the movie and you think it's a documentary, like, these people and you want to know what happens to them. And I think that's something very special and unique about him. And what I love and this is from a filmmaker point of view, I think he's just made such a powerful story that talks about family values and environment. And he's so passionate about some of his own values. He's been in the water a lot. He's an environmentalist. He wants to protect the environment. He's a vegan, and he promotes, if you go to his set, he wants to encourage people to consider being vegan and plant-based for a couple of times a day. And I was on set in Lightstorm, and they provide vegan meals. So if you've never had it before, you can try it. And I think that says a lot about someone who's trying to do something for the environment. And as a collaborator, as working with Jim, I loved it. He's very collaborative. He is very open to talking, and he's very, very generous in his place. Whenever we did some shot and it was final, he has a few key phrases he says when he's like, "You nailed it," or "Bingo bongo." He says a few things, and whenever in a recording for an interaction or some shots we presented, we would send it out to the team, and it is such a high point for the team to hear James Cameron praising their work. So I love the fact that he knew how much his praise and his appreciation means to the crew, and he was always sometimes sending out recordings, sometimes appreciating the artists. He would visit our studio, and just he's very, very, he's all about the crew. He knows what we do and how hard we work, and he wants to be there for us.
Nice. I'm getting goose flesh as you're talking, because James Cameron is the reason I'm part of this industry. So as a 6-year-old, my first ever film of my life was Terminator 2: Judgment Day, and it changed my perspective towards everything. So
yeah. Hey, you and me both.
Okay. Pavani, I have to ask you this. I've been itching to ask this question since I watched the film.
Yeah.
One of the things that really stood out to me was there was a variable frame rate while I was watching the film. What was happening? Why was that needed? And what was the thought behind it?
The movie was shot at 4K, and big portion of the movie is at native 48 FPS, so it's 48 frames per second. But there are some shots which are 24 FPS, and that's probably what you notice the variable frame rate when you're watching it. What we did is not rendering 48 FPS for the entire film is quite a feat because it means twice the amount of images. And just to get some stats out here, back in 2009, when I was working in Avatar, they used to give out little rewards when we hit some sort of a milestone. And in 2009, maybe 6 months before delivery, the data storage for the film hit 1 petabyte. And we all got a gift, right? Back in 2009. We thought it was a big deal that it hit 1 petabyte. We got little dog tags and a cupcake, and everyone was like, oh my God. We hit 19 petabytes on this film. 19 petabytes. That's because rendering 48 FPS means everything has to be done twice the number of frames. You have to store the data. Compositors have to QC and comp the data. You have to light. So it's twice. So that's why what we did is, and this is Jim doing it. Jim called out 48 FPS shots where you would likely in other scenarios at 24 notice either a strobing or motion blur. Now, all of the underwater shots are native 48 because we knew the underwater shot needed it. Sometimes we would use 48 FPS if it's a fast moving camera, or, sometimes when Jake is riding the skim wing and he's moving really close towards us. So Jim would call it out. And when it was more dialogue-based scenes where it's just one person talking to the other person, we stuck to the 24 because we thought there wasn't a need to do the high frame rate because those are more traditional scenes that we're normally used to. So that is the reason you have a variable frame rate.
All right. I mean, I have 100 questions about this, but we can't get into it. I'll just ask you the final question, Pavani. I have to ask you, a lot of times we hear in India that, Indian filmmakers always aspire to make films like Hollywood, especially the big CGI fiestas. But we're not sort of able to do that. We've done it recently with a film like Brahmastra, but yet, there is so much more to bridge that gap. So, I mean, what would your advice be to Indian filmmakers? How can they plan for these mega budget films, these really VFX heavy stories? What goes into it? I mean, because you worked for it on such films for so long, what advice would you give Indian filmmakers?
First of all, I think Brahmastra is an amazing movie. I've seen it. I think it is spectacular. And what I think is really amazing about films like this is it's really about the story. It's a filmmaker who's trying to tell a story, and the visual effects is a tool to be able to tell the story. And that's how good visual effects comes about. It's not an extravaganza to appreciate the visual effects. It's a story, and the visual effects help you, with the story. I think the pool of artists who are working on Brahmastra, working on Way of Water, or any movie right now are the same. I've had people who've joined my team to work on Way of Water who have worked on, who were in Mumbai 6 months ago, or who were in Mumbai. So the pool of artists who works in visual effects all over the world now, because the artists are everywhere. It's the same artists. So the artists are able to do all sorts of stuff, hard movies, easy movies. I think what we perhaps need to do is just, at least at Weta, this is our process, is at Weta we measure thrice, cut once, which is plan the heck out of it. Spend a lot of time planning, preparing before we do anything. Like even in a movie like this, 2 years was just planning. We start ground up. We're not afraid to think outside the box. A very simple example is we've obviously done shows where we've done fire effects or we've done sand effects, but we said, you know what, this movie is too important. We shot so many references. We went into the beach and we shot people running in the wood sand. We actually built scale miniatures and shot stuff. So at Weta, our process is always ground yourself in reality for visual effects. No matter how fantastical, you need to be able to associate with something that's here. If it's a fire, find a small fire, shoot it, match it, then make a big fire. So that's our process at Weta, and I think that's what we do. So I can't speak for other studios, but I think what makes Weta successful is always ground yourself in reality, reference.
All right. I'm sure that is good advice. I can vouch for it because I want to be a filmmaker. I'm pretty sure that'll help me out as well.
Yeah, cool. Hey, nice talking to you, Rachit.
Same here, Pavani. Best of luck for your future endeavors as well. And I'm at least going to watch Avatar 5 more times in the theater.
Hey, you and me both. I'm going to watch it with my in-laws in Chennai this week. And then I'm going to watch it with some more friends next week. So it's going to be at least 5 more times by the time it's New Year's.
I'm sure it's all right, Pavani. Thank you so much.
See ya. Have a nice week.
See you. Bye.